Long haul truckers, what's the creepiest or most paranormal thing you've seen on the road at night? My dad has told me this story a couple times and each time it always kind of weirds me out. He is not a trucker, but when he was in the military one night him and a buddy went out to get food. About halfway into their drive down a dark road my dad and his buddy noticed a woman in a red dress with black hair walking. My dad and his buddy found it odd because it didn't seem safe and it wasn't that warm. My dad said deep down he knew stopping was a bad idea and so they drove by a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. As they drove by, my dad and his friend both swear she has no face. Instead, there was just a black hole as if she had been in a wreck and her face was taken off. It freaked them both out so badly, my dad floored it, and when they stopped to eat, both of them agreed they saw the same thing. Come to find out, a woman had been killed earlier that year in an accident. They were talking about it when a stranger told them the sightings of the woman were actually common. I am not one to believe in the paranormal, but the story is still kind of weird. Obligatory not a trucker but. The black dog is a popular omen seen by many truckers while spending late nights out on the road. The dog appears late at night when the driver starts to drift off to sleep, and often is a precursor or warning to a fatal crash. While there are many stories of truckers seeing the dog and snapping back to reality with the sudden rush of adrenaline, there are also a handful of stories where a trucker swerved to avoid the dog, resulting in a crash. I had a late night on the road a few months ago after a concert, and had to drive back across the state. About an hour in I could feel my eyes getting heavy, regardless of the coffee I was drinking. As I drove through an underpass I was able to see a flash of black just out of the corner of my eye. I brushed it off as nothing, until later the same thing happened on the left side of the road just within the view of my headlights. I had read stories about the black dog before and knew I should soon pull off the highway and wait for my caffeine to really start working. Not a trucker, but my dad was. When I was young he'd take me on hauls sometimes. On one such trip, we were heading across I-80 I think, in Nebraska, and there was a snowstorm. We got to a part of the highway where a cop had blocked it off saying it was closed and we had to pull off for the night. We ended up pulling into an old Motel 8 that was closed or abandoned, and went to sleep in the cab. The next morning there were 3 sets of footprints in the snow around the truck. The footprints came out of the woods and circled the truck several times and looked like they had paused at windows and whatnot and then led back into the woods. Not sure what was up, but I remember my dad acting weird and he didn't take me out on the road after that. I was in rural Maine looking for a lumber mill just before sunset. It took hours to get out there because Maine is riddled with these narrow windy roads that try and get as close as possible to every building in every village from US 1 to Canada. So I pull in just as the last guy is leaving. I ask him where to park and say I'll see him in the morning. I park my truck in this fairly large gravel parking lot with thick forest right on all sides. There are no visible artificial lights except for my truck and my flashlight. After I get parked, I go and sit out in a lawn chair and just enjoy the warm night air, looking at the absolutely beautiful night sky. It was a rare treat to enjoy, basically no light pollution. As I'm looking at the stars, like a switch was flipped, what sound like 50 coyotes, 60 feet away, start howling like mad. It is at this point I nope right back into the truck and don't open the door until sunrise. The town of West Salem, Wisconsin has always kind of given me the shivers. It's like it's both empty and full of people at the same time. Nothing concrete, just feels like things aren't quite right in that town. This isn't my story but an old friend of mine's. In the 90s John was an IT guy in parts of eastern Iowa and far west Illinois. He was used to driving from one account to another either late at night or early in the morning. He'd pick a halfway point to use a rest stop and to grab one of those awful paper cup coffees from the machines while he was there. One early morning, about 4:30 a.m., he was in Iowa and he stopped at a wide spot in the road rest stop. He parked and there weren't any other people there except for a couple of semis who looked like they had been there for quite a while. He went into the men's room and it was deserted. He used the bathroom and went to the sink to wash his hands. He said he caught some movement from the corner of his eye and there was a very tall, very thin man standing right in the middle of the entrance about 15 feet away. He was dressed all in black and he says that the guy's eyes were pitch black. The man was giggling to himself and John swore he was at least 8 feet tall. He glanced down to grab a paper towel from the machine and when he looks up this man is so close he can hear him breathing with a loud bubbly sound. There's no way he could have crossed 15 feet in 1 second. As he told it, this thing, slowly smiled at him and it wasn't a smile. It was a bearing of serrated, sharp teeth and this thing starts chuckling like he's looking at a 3-piece KFC meal. My friend screams Jesus help me. And runs for his car. My friend says the thing is startled, like he wasn't supposed to be able to move. He felt like he should have been frozen, like staring at a snake. He runs to his car, which wasn't locked, slams the locks down, starts the car and floors it getting out of there. As he's leaving, he looks in the rear view and this thing is running after the car. He always swore somehow this thing followed him home. He was paralyzed in an accident not long after, and I went to care for him for a little while. I brought my 4-year-old son with me, and in his typical baby way, he would chatter away while the two of us were talking. I asked him one day who he was talking to. My son said he says his name is Biter. He has long teeth and he lives with Mr. John. I grabbed my son and ran out of there. I never went back to that house. Driving my flatbed from St. Helena, California, to Wiley, Texas. This happened somewhere near the Texahoma border. I picked up a hitchhiker. He was standing by the side of the road with a trembling thumb out. Trembling from the cold maybe? Soon I would learn that this was the trembling of fear. The trembling of a man, who looked as though he has seen a ghost. Where to? I asked. Please, I know this is weird. Just take me to a bar, for I need a drink. I will buy you a drink or a hot sandwich. I thought this was odd. I have picked up many hitchhikers in my day, and such a request was never asked. As I was about to say, get lost buddy, whatever you're selling, I'm not buying, but I looked into the man's eyes and I saw terror. Something compelled me to open my passenger door for this man. He entered. At the bar, the hitchhiker began his tale. Earlier on this night of torrential rain, the hitchhiker was seeking a ride. Next to the road he sat with his thumb out. For hours he waited in the rain. A few cars passed, but none slowed. Frustrated, the hitchhiker was about to rest his thumb and find shelter for the night, and then he saw headlights. Headlights of a very slow approaching car. The hitchhiker eagerly approached the car waiting for it to stop. Oddly, the slow-moving car continued drifting forward. Maybe the pace was slowing, or maybe this car was always moving at such a slow speed. But this car never came to a complete stop. The headlights pierced the rain, as the hitchhiker stood confused. Will this car stop? Perhaps I should get in. I have never seen a car drive so slowly like this. The hitchhiker decided to just jump in this car. He stumbled to the rain as he pulled the passenger door and had a seat. To his horror, there was no one in the driver's seat. There was no one in the back seat. The car was bare. But it kept moving forward. The headlights still on, but now in front of him as he looked out of the windshield. As the car continued to creep forward, the hitchhiker quickly exited this ghost car, ran for miles. He rested. He ran some more. Rested, ran some more. Finally, after catching his breath, he stuck out his thumb and stood by a road. The hitchhiker then saw headlights. But this time the car was driving at a reasonable pace. It wasn't a car at all, it was a flatbed truck. That is where the hitchhiker and I met. The bartender brings the hitchhiker and me our beer. The service at this bar sucked. And then, 2 men, drenched in rain, came running into the bar. They pointed at the hitchhiker. Hey, there's the idiot that tried jumping into our car as we were pushing it through the rain. Not a trucker, but I ran onto something creepy on a road and I have a picture of it too. My friend and I were coming back from a concert one night and were taking a shortcut through this area that was being worked on, so there wasn't really anyone around because it was late and the streets were closed. As we're crossing this small bridge, I looked up and saw what appeared to be a zombie rat jumping at my face. Scared the fuck out of me. Turns out that someone had taken a mummified rat or squirrel and used wire to position it mid-air on that bridge. I actually haven't told anyone this because I think I imagined it, but I've been having nightmares about this, so I guess I need to get it off my chest. I was hauling lumber on 36E between Fortuna, California and Red Bluff, California, on my way to the 5S. This was in 95 or 96, right before the coastal lumber industry folded. Route 36 is basically a glorified logging road. It twists through the mountain ranges and goes to one lane several times. Anyway, I got a late start, which was okay, as I like driving at night anyway. It was probably around 10 or 11 at night. As I crept up into the mountains, there was a nasty bit of fog. I rounded a corner, and suddenly there were all these deer just standing in the middle of the road, in the fog. It was kind of creepy, just seeing all these deer standing in the fog, in the middle of the road. I'm used to seeing them running across the road, not standing. I blew my horn, and they all turned and looked into my headlights, their ears twitching, the buck's antlers casting long twisted shadows into the fog. I blew my horn again, and they lazily walked to the side of the road. I idled forward between them. I looked out my driver window and saw the bucks and does warily looking back at me as I drove through them. But that wasn't the creepy part. I reached the peak and started back down. The fog on the eastern side abated. But as I rounded a corner, I saw a guy walking down the road, down the middle of the oncoming lane, his back to me. He had shoulder-length black hair, wet and stringy from the moisture that had been in the air. He wore a faded blue wool-lined jean jacket, hands in pockets, and darker jean pants. When my lights hit him, he swerved toward the shoulder of the other lane, giving me room. Then the most horrifying thing happened. I was going maybe 25 or 30 at this point, but as I came up to him, he suddenly bolted right in front of my truck. The last thing I saw was his wide black eyes and his mouth open in a silent yell, a black pit and his white face shining in my headlights before disappearing under the horizon of my hood. I stood on the brakes, the cab and the trailer behind hopping. I remember just thinking, Jesus, Jesus, oh Jesus. I hopped out of the cab, I don't remember turning on the flashers, and ran back behind the truck. I saw him walking back up the hill, behind my truck, hands in his jacket pockets, his back illuminated by my red lights. He looked back at me, his black eyes and black mouth now grinning toothlessly. Then he dashed into the trees at the edge of the road. I was so scared, I didn't call out. I just got in my cab and drove on. I still dream about those wide eyes and that unholy mouth disappearing under my hood. I hope the dreams stop now. Pulled over for a break on the way to Melbourne from Sydney at a truck stop. No street lights or anything, pitch black. No other trucks or cars at the stop. I turn off my lights. I switch the truck off. Do the curtains. Lock the truck from both sides. Jump into bed. Set my alarm and set my phone above me in the compartment. I was rolling over from side to side for around 5 to 10 minutes. I couldn't get to sleep due to it being prime summer temperatures, reaching around 30 degrees at night. I'm looking up at the ceiling mentally planning out the day ahead. Suddenly the passenger side door opens up slightly, cabin light turns on. What the fuck? Now, the truck is fairly a late model and in pristine condition, so Therese, no question about door being faulty or anything. I just sat there for what felt like eternity expecting someone to come up and see me sitting there with the solid rod in my hand that we use for tightening belts. No one came up, nor was there any noise at all. Just quiet, eerie silence. I grabbed my torch, and jumped down, walked around the truck. No other trucks were around. Nor were there any cars. It was just me and my fully loaded B-double. After around 5 to 10 minutes of getting fucked around with, I locked up and went to bed again. Woke up next morning, yawned, fixed myself up along with the bed. Opened the curtains, and FML, there's a cemetery next to the stop where I parked. Hunger and laziness all escaped upon realization. Grabbed keys, fuck putting shoes on, fuck putting pants on, switched truck on, and then just got the fuck out of there ASAP. My boyfriend is a truck driver who routinely does midnight runs. Oddly enough, I asked him this question myself a few days ago. He told me that one night he was getting ready to park in a lot next to a truck stop. He said it looked like there was no lights, no cars, no sign of anyone, but he said screw it, he was tired. He woke up the next morning parked on the side of the road with 3 highway patrol vehicles behind him. He was about 15 miles away from the truck stop he parked at. Thing is, he was sleeping in his camper the whole night. He has no idea how he got on the side of the road, and logic says someone tried stealing the truck and succeeded. And the police convinced him of this happening as they saw a man in a black jumpsuit running away from his truck into a nearby field. Even then, he still feels uneasy about the whole situation. Apparently the doors were still locked from the inside and there was no real sign of anyone trying to break in. Not a trucker, but I drive a lot of miles in a company truck for my oilfield company. I am on call 24/7, so I'm out at all hours. One night after a long day on a location in the Oklahoma Panhandle, which is rather remote and sparsely populated, I was driving back to the town where my shop is located. I got too sleepy to drive and decided to pull over and nap until the sun came up. So, I pulled off of the 2-lane highway down a county road and parked on the side of that road. It's safer than pulling off on the shoulder of the highway and no headlights to bother you. This was and is common practice for me. I left my pickup running and turned the headlights off and leaned my seat back and fell asleep pretty quick with the AC on low and the radio turned off. I slept pretty good for maybe an hour and then I guess I was having strange dreams, so I woke up but just kept laying there because I was groggy. The wind was picking up and sort of shaking the truck with random strong gusts. Lots of wind in Oklahoma. Eventually, I started to imagine I was hearing whispering or murmurs, but I attributed it to the wind and my sleepy state, or maybe the radio being still on but low volume. I kept hearing it, so I sat up and turned the headlights back on to look around. The lights illuminated the dirt road to my side and in front of me. About 50 feet in front of my truck and extending down the road into the dark where my headlights faded out were maybe 20 coyotes, all milling around and sniffling around in the gravel of the road. Their eyes reflecting in the lights. Coyotes usually run from light and avoid humans and their noise at all cost. There was no fear in these coyotes, and I was sort of struck by how many there were all standing in the road. They all eventually moved off into the dark as a group. I wasn't really afraid as I was inside my truck, but my feeling was an uneasy one. So, I got back on the highway and went home. After reading through a majority of the comments on this thread, my curiosity was piqued and I called my mom up to ask her if my great-grandfather, a trucker during the 60s, had ever told her a creepy story of being on the road. To my surprise, she said there was one story he told her as a cautionary tale. It's not about parking overnight somewhere, but I thought it might fit in here just the same. He said he was driving through somewhere pretty rural, a small town with a few houses here and there. As he was making his way down the road, he saw a large cardboard box tumble down a hill and come to a stop pretty much directly in his path on the road. It was too late for him to brake, but why would he? It's just a cardboard box, it's not like it would hurt his truck if he ran over it, so he kept chugging forward. At nearly the last second, he said something came over him and he immediately swerved to the right to avoid hitting the box. When he looked in his rearview mirror, he saw two little kids scramble out of the box and back up the hill. It's amazing what little kids in a small town will do for fun. I still feel sick to my stomach after hearing my mom tell that story.